Boeing is the second commercial operator to ferry crews to the ISS. The ship is expected to return to Earth on June 14th. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for June 5th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. After enormous acts of perseverance and patience in the face of delays, the liftoff of the 197-foot Boeing Starliner has taken place. 1.6 million pounds of thrust becoming a speck in the blue morning sky. We'll talk to Bill Harwood at Kennedy Space Center. President Biden touches down in France to commemorate the victory for freedom 80 years ago, sparked by the D-Day landing, and to deliver a warning about the current invasion in Europe and about those who would flirt with autocracy back home. Democracy seemed on the ropes in India, but the people spoke. A leader preparing to seize more power now has less of it. We'll have a report on what to think as the dust settles. The Globe just reported the hottest 12 months in a row on record. And we'll check in on Phoenix, which last year had 133 days where it was over 100 degrees. And we'll discuss also how climate change is creating refugees all over the globe. Plus, a look at how artificial intelligence is reshaping the investment landscape, increased concern about a terrorist attack, and a look back at a lone man standing for freedom in the face of advancing tanks in Tiananmen Square. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report in France, where President Biden will use the 80th anniversary of the Allied landing on D-Day to commemorate the defeat of authoritarian rule in Europe. On Thursday, the president will visit the beaches of Normandy, where the U.S., U.K., and other allied nations invaded Nazi-occupied France on June 6, 1944. More than 4,000 soldiers died, including more than 2,500 American men. The brutal battles were the first steps towards the liberation of Europe and ultimately the Allied victory in World War II. While in France, President Biden will also meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron. Biden is expected to reaffirm his commitment to America's European allies, freedom, and democratic rule, contrasting himself with Donald Trump, who has recently suggested again that he would punish political rivals if elected. For more, let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who is in Paris with the president. Ed, give me some of the overarching themes that we're going to hear from President Biden during this trip.
John, good to be with you. I think the big one is a broad defense of the future of democracy on this continent, in the United States, and around the world. Just before your broadcast began tonight, we received word from the White House, for example, that the president spoke today with Narendra Modi, who I know you're going to be speaking about later in this program, just won himself a re-election as well down in India. This is a big year for elections around the world, and there are some underway here in Europe as well for the European Union. And so by going to Normandy to be part of the D-Day commemorations on Thursday, by giving a big speech at Pointe du Hoc nearby on Friday at a place where Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton gave similar addresses many years ago, Biden trying to cast the current crises around the world as another example of good versus evil, democracy versus autocracy, and the need for the world to pay attention to and take seriously the threats to democratic, lower D, democratic norms, again, here in Europe, in the United States, and in other countries facing challenges to their democratic rule.
Issue number one, and in the neighborhood, of course, is Ukraine. He'll be meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Is that purely symbolic? Is there a message that he wants to deliver? What's the objective in that meeting?
Well, it's symbolic, but it's also going to be substantive. No Russian official has been invited to these D-Day commemorations by the French government, notable because they have been, of course, in the past. But given the ongoing conflict and given that Zelensky is coming to France for the commemorations, the French agreed with the British, Americans, and others that it wasn't proper to invite them. So symbolically, he's here and he'll stand alongside these other leaders. Substantively, Zelensky is expected to push the president here in France this week and then next week at the G7 meetings in Italy to allow more flexibility in what Ukraine can do with American-provided weaponry and other equipment. Can they go further into Russia and target other military installations or equipment inside Russia, further in beyond Kharkiv? Can they use those weapons and intelligence in other matters to try to aggressively push back against the Russian offensive? The president, at least publicly, has been reluctant beyond some limited allowances for things, again, around Kharkiv now. Whether he agrees this week to do more under pressure from President Macron here in France or other European leaders who say it's time to intensify the defense of Ukraine remains to be seen. But it'll be a key meeting, and one, frankly, that draws attention back to Ukraine after so many months of primary American focus being in the Middle East, given the conflict there.
Quickly at the end here, Ed, you and I have been exchanging emails about domestic politics and the rhetoric of President Biden. Is he going to take this opportunity to, in the context of defending democratic norms and institutions, respond either directly or implicitly with what former President Trump has been saying, that it's, quote, very possible, the former president said, that he could imprison his political opponents if he's reelected in November? How explicit will the president be in drawing contrast to his opponent?
I would anticipate implicit references to it in his speech Friday at Pointe du Hoc, and then in a visit he's making Sunday before flying home. He's going to a cemetery outside Paris where American soldiers and Marines who died in World War I are buried. Those that follow the Trump presidency may remember that on a similar trip in 2018, then President Trump was supposed to go to that cemetery, canceled a helicopter visit there, declined to take a motorcade under cloudy skies, and was later reported by the Atlantic magazine to have called those buried there, quote, losers and suckers. It was strongly denied by President Trump, but it was quickly seized upon by then candidate Joe Biden as the latest example of him, Trump, not being someone who could be taken seriously on national security, military, and veterans affairs. Now, as President Biden is here in France and will make that visit, no matter what the weather looks like, the White House says, to implicitly contrast himself with his predecessor and potential successor and demonstrate that he, at least, is trying to show respect for the military, respect for those that served here in Europe and that continue to with the conflicts underway in Ukraine.
Ed O'Keefe, traveling with the president in Paris. Thank you so much, Ed. Israel has launched a new assault on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military says it has seized operational control over 2 areas in central Gaza. The recent offensive comes as the Biden administration increases its efforts to push Hamas and Israel to accept a new ceasefire and hostage release proposal. Meanwhile, American embassies in the Middle East are on high alert after an attack outside the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon Wednesday. Imtiaz Tayeb is in Tel Aviv with more details. Imtiaz?
Well, John, I've been to that embassy, which is in a suburb just outside of Beirut, and I can tell you that it is extremely fortified. In fact, in order to get anywhere close to the diplomatic compound, you have to cross multiple security barriers and checkpoints. So the fact that you would see the Lebanese army engaged in a gunfight with a gunman so close to the U.S. embassy is extremely alarming. Now, what we do know is that the shooter is of Syrian background and is currently in hospital suffering from a gunshot wound, but what we don't know is a motive. Now, all of this comes as tensions across the border with Israel and Lebanon are extremely high, especially after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this, that we are prepared for a very strong action in the north. Now, this is after Hezbollah rockets landed inside of northern Israeli territory, sparking a massive fire where over 3,500 acres of land are now under fire. Now, this, of course, is at a time when really we're seeing a huge diplomatic effort to try to end the war in Gaza, with the White House's top Middle East advisor on his way to Egypt, or in Egypt now, and the head of the CIA in Qatar as part of attempts to push for a breakthrough on the Israeli plan outlined by President Biden to again end the war in Gaza and see the hostages released. John.
Imtiaz Tayeb in Tel Aviv. Thank you. 2 of Hunter Biden's former romantic partners testified Wednesday in his federal gun trial. The president's son faces 3 counts related to lying about drug use when purchasing a gun and possession of a gun while using narcotics. Hunter Biden's lawyers emphasized that he did not knowingly lie on a federal background check to obtain the firearm. During their testimonies Wednesday, Biden's ex-wife, Kathleen Buell, and ex-girlfriend Zoe Keston both detailed his substance abuse during the time in question. Keston noted that while they were together, she saw Hunter smoking crack, quote, every 20 minutes or so. Also on Wednesday, House Republicans issued criminal referrals against Hunter Biden and the president's brother, James Biden. They're accusing both men of making false statements to Congress during interviews as a part of their year-long impeachment inquiry. For months, GOP leaders have tried to build an impeachment case tying President Biden to his son's business dealings. They have not found evidence to do so. Senate Republicans voted to block a bill pushed by Democrats Wednesday that would have guaranteed access to contraception nationwide. Republican leadership referred to Wednesday's vote as a, quote, show vote. Not an act of legislation, but theater. But Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said otherwise after the decision.
Today was not a show vote. This was a show us who you are vote. And Senate Republicans showed the American people exactly who they are. They showed that they're not willing to stand up and protect something that 92% of Americans support.
The bill, known as the Right to Contraception Act, failed to pass. It was first introduced by Democrats in 2022 after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. But some Republicans, like Texas Senator John Cornyn, have dismissed the bill, calling it unnecessary since contraception is not illegal. Up and away. It's a mission that's been planned for 10 years. Wednesday, it happened. Boeing Starliner spacecraft successfully launched into Earth's orbit. 2 NASA astronauts were pushed along at over 3,800 miles an hour as they left the atmosphere. They're now on their way for a Thursday rendezvous with the International Space Station. This was Boeing's 3rd attempt to launch its first crewed mission after technical issues delayed previous attempts. CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood joins us from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Bill, it's always good to be with you. Remind us again why it took a while for this to launch successfully.
You know, it's actually a really good question, John. I mean, a lot of us have been very surprised that it's taken Boeing this long to get the Starliner into space. You know, this is one of the most experienced aerospace companies on the planet, and yet they're 4 years behind their rival SpaceX in terms of launching U.S. astronauts on U.S.-built spacecraft in the wake of the shuttle retirement back in 2011. They've had a series of technical problems that could have happened to anybody. There have been a lot of them, though, and it's taken a long time to get them all resolved. And these recent delays we've seen over the past month, they were caused by the United Launch Alliance Atlas V rocket primarily. These are sort of run-of-the-mill glitches that occasionally get them. It just turned out there were 3 of these, 2 of these in a row. And then the Starliner had this helium leak that they had to all go off and debate for quite a while before finally concluding they could safely launch as is. And so far, that seems to be the case. Almost no problems at all with this launch today, and they report the spacecraft's doing very well indeed.
How significant is this bill as a shot in the arm for NASA and Boeing, and how significant is it as a technological achievement?
Well, it's not over yet, of course. They've got to get back to Earth safely. But it's definitely a shot in the arm for both NASA and for Boeing, which has been under a lot of pressure lately given the troubles they've had in their aircraft sector. But, you know, for NASA, it's really important. From day one, they have wanted 2 different spacecraft from different vendors to be ready to carry astronauts to and from the space station, just in case a technical problem might crop up down the road and ground one of those spacecraft. So, you know, if a SpaceX Crew Dragon got grounded, they would still be able to send their crews to the space station using Boeing Starliner and vice versa. So that's very important for NASA. And, of course, for Boeing to finally get this thing going, they plan to launch a routine mission starting next year. It is, in fact, a shot in the arm. I think they were looking for some good news out of this launch, and so far they've gotten it.
And, Bill, briefly, before I have to move on, what are they going to do, the astronauts, on this trip before they come back?
Well, it's a test flight. You know, this is the first flight of the Starliner with astronauts on board, so they're really going to put it through its paces. They're testing the manual controls, all the subsystems on the spacecraft, make sure all of that's working as designed before NASA certifies it to begin operational missions next year, carrying crews to and from the space station.
Bill Harwood at the Kennedy Space Center. Thank you, Bill, as always. More than 2 months after a cargo ship crashed into Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge, the final piece of the bridge has been lifted from the water. This video shows the twisted girders being pulled out of the shipping channel. Salvage crews used tools both above and below the water to secure the final steel segment. Full restoration of port traffic is expected later this week, which is roughly on schedule. A lackluster victory for India's Prime Minister coming up. Narendra Modi said his party would win 400 seats. They won 292. We'll discuss the election results in the most populous country in the world. Plus, last summer, Phoenix, Arizona was a hot mess with seemingly endless days of temperatures over 100 degrees. We'll check in on what they're doing to prepare for this summer. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Artificial intelligence is reshaping American life, and that includes changing the investment landscape, where AI-related stocks are booming. To understand how and where, we thought we'd examine some of the best-performing stocks to learn about the industries that make up the AI revolution. First, the chip makers. If there's a single stock that exemplifies the blossoming investor enthusiasm for artificial intelligence, it is the chip maker NVIDIA. The California-based company was responsible for half of all the gains in the S&P 500 last month. NVIDIA's core product is the graphics processing units, known as GPUs. They differ from CPU chips in that GPUs process functions in parallel rather than sequentially, perfect for the complex calculations necessary for artificial intelligence. NVIDIA overtook Apple today as the U.S. public company with the second largest market capitalization. Those GPUs NVIDIA makes live in servers. Supermicro Computer, which makes servers and software to manage them, has seen a 181% jump in stock price this year. Those servers are powerful computers which handle enormous volumes of data and support multiple requests simultaneously. It's where the machine learning that is central to artificial intelligence takes place. Servers housed in enormous centers, some as big as 10 million square feet, like the China Telecom Data Center, require infrastructure to manage the energy required to run all those computers and keep them cool. Energy infrastructure company Vertiv Holdings has seen its shares jump over 800% over the last 3 years. AI requires a lot more power to work than normal operations. A single ChatGPT search requires 866% more energy than Googling the same information, according to the International Energy Agency. Then there are the companies gaining from just their sheer association with AI giants, which investors interpret as a sign of confidence that their products will play a key role in the future. SoundHound AI, a company that runs an artificial intelligence voice and conversation platform, is one of the peer companies NVIDIA revealed holding investments in earlier this year. Almost 4 years since that announcement, the stock is up 134% to date. The tech companies investing in AI have also seen a boost from the enthusiasm around it. Microsoft, one of OpenAI's main partners, reported a 17% gain in revenue compared to last year in its third quarter earnings report. It also revealed that sales of its cloud computing product, Azure, has also grown 31%, largely because of its integration with AI products. European scientists say May was the 12th straight month the world saw record high temperatures. Experts say climate change and man-made emissions are fueling the trend. According to the ICF Climate Center, many U.S. cities in the South and Midwest are expected to see more days with higher temperatures if current emissions rates continue. In Phoenix, Arizona specifically, the city is projected to see between 21 and 36 added days of temperatures above 95 degrees by year 2050. Last year, Phoenix had 133 days of 100-degree and over temperatures. CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga joins us from Washington. Nicole, heat deaths in Maricopa County, which is in Arizona, have increased roughly tenfold in the last decade. We mentioned how hot it got last year. What's being done to manage the heat this summer?
Yeah, John, officials in Maricopa County have started treating heat as an emergency. Phoenix has a heat officer, the first of its kind position for America's hottest city. His name is David Hondula. Now, in terms of solutions, we're not just talking about planting trees. In fact, many experts have pointed out to me that trees need water and take years to develop a canopy. They're not the best approach in desert environments like Phoenix. Last year, 1/3 of heat calls to 911 centers occurred when cooling centers were closed in Maricopa County. So this year, county officials are opening up 2 24/7 cooling centers. They're providing more public transportation to those centers across the county.
And who's most vulnerable in these high heat moments?
Yeah, nearly half of the heat death victims last year were members of Phoenix's homeless population. And we should point out, John, addressing the problem of heat means confronting other social challenges that community faces, like access to affordable housing. Beyond that, different people have different tolerances for heat. The elderly, pregnant women, infants, folks with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, heart disease, all at a greater risk of heat exhaustion if you're taking a medication, antihistamines, high blood pressure meds, chemotherapy. All of that is dehydrating. That means you need to hydrate before going outside. Wear a hat, carry an umbrella, limit your outdoor exposure in the middle of the day during summer, and even in months like June, where we're at right now.
You explained to me last year when this was all going on that you explained why heat is particularly dangerous in urban settings. Remind me why that is again?
Yeah, this urban heat is not your grandma's heat. What do I mean by that? I want to share a clip from Dr. Melissa Guardaro. She's an assistant research professor at the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. Take a listen.
The misconception is that, oh, it's hot here, I've dealt with it before, it should be fine. But in actuality, it's not the same heat. These heat waves have become more intense and longer, and the overnight temperatures relating to the urban heat island offer no relief. So when it's in 90 degrees, the low is 90 degrees, you're just not getting any relief whatsoever. So people need to take this very seriously.
Urban heat island, a phenomena created by paving over desert with asphalt and concrete, means an expanding urban jungle, in this case in America's 5th largest city, Phoenix. It absorbs heat during the day, and then come nighttime it releases it back into the air. I was there last year. It means after the sun sets, it feels like you're literally baking. And that's not just miserable, John. If your body can't cool down ever, it's very dangerous for your health.
Nicole Skanga in Washington. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thank you.
President Dwight Eisenhower famously said, "Plans are meaningless, but planning is everything," which means you have to plan for something that might never happen. On June 5th, 1944, Ike, as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe, issued the order for the D-Day operation, and then he planned for defeat. "Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops," Eisenhower penciled out in a speech he prepared if the invasion was unsuccessful. "My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." As you can see, Eisenhower underlined the phrase "mine alone." Historians also point out that in his passion, the future president mistakenly dated the note July 5th at the bottom, rather than June. He got the date wrong, but the invasion plan was right. A U.S. dual citizen has been sentenced to jail in Russia, what he's been accused of, and how long he's expected to stay behind bars. Here's Streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate. Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing or bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. President Biden landed in France Wednesday to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. While in Normandy, Biden will also meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Biden's speeches will focus on the need to stand up to dictators. Back in the United States, the president's son Hunter was back in court, where he faces charges he lied about drug use when purchasing a gun. Hunter Biden's ex-wife, Kathleen Buell, and a woman he was later romantically involved with, both took the stand. The two women testified about Hunter's drug usage and finding drug paraphernalia. Boeing Starliner capsule finally took off Wednesday after years of delays. This is Boeing Starliner's first crewed flight into space, sending 2 astronauts to the International Space Station. The successful launch means Boeing is now joining SpaceX as a taxi service for NASA. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has secured a 3rd term in office, but hundreds of millions of eligible voters handed his party and its allies a substantially reduced mandate. The ruling National Democratic Alliance won 293 seats, enough to win a majority, but far from its stated goal of 400 seats. And yet Modi says he was, quote, very, very happy with the results, even as India's stock market tumbled. Modi himself is also under scrutiny for his campaign tactics. He has used anti-Islamic rhetoric, calling Muslims infiltrators, and he has accused the opposition party of wanting to redistribute wealth to the Muslim community. Avantika Chilkoti joins us now. She's an international correspondent for The Economist and host of the Modi Raj podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. So what does it mean? What does it mean that the Prime Minister underperformed by so much, or that his party did, I should say?
You have to see this vote as a referendum on Modi. If you've been in India recently, which I have for the podcast, his face is everywhere. It's on every billboard in every city. If you're a poor person in India, you've been receiving welfare, you've been receiving handouts, sacks of grain, say, with the Prime Minister's name on it. The BJP put him at the center of the campaign. The BJP manifesto, his party's manifesto, was called Modi's Guarantee. So the fact that the BJP is back in power, looks like it's going to be back in power, but is actually now without a majority, relying on coalition allies, it's really something of a humbling for Narendra Modi himself.
And Avantika, will Modi then have to recalibrate the way he governs and that style? And does he have the capacity or the skills to do that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because Narendra Modi, since he actually entered politics in 2002, electoral politics, he has always worked with a very strong majority. His entire style, his entire personality is about centralized control. It's a very strong man style. I can't think of a recent example of this prime minister having had to make some sort of compromise. It's a very different sort of politics. And here he's going to be working in a coalition for the first time. And the coalition partners, it looks like he's going to be working with, they are small parties and they are highly unreliable. These are parties that have switched sides again and again. It's going to require a different kind of political skill. What I will say is that Modi has reinvented himself time and again. So we shouldn't rule out him reinventing himself here and managing that political task. 2002, after the Gujarat riots, those bloody anti-Muslim, the pogrom essentially in Gujarat, when he was the leader, at that time he was seen as Emperor of Hindu hearts. And then he remade himself as sort of the CEO, the pro-business CEO. So now we're waiting to see, will he reinvent himself as some sort of, coalition building politician? It's possible.
And what will, if he's reinventing himself, what's the issue set in front of him? What challenges does India face that he's got to now wrestle with this new arrangement?
So Modi has always had this two-part offering for India. On one hand, he's offering economic reform. This is a country that is currently growing, they say, by 8%. By all sensible estimates, it's the fastest growing big economy in the world. People there are aspirational. People want to see growth. They want to see development. However, Modi has not delivered jobs. By some recent estimates, youth unemployment is 45%. There's absolutely no way you can have a sensible economic program without creating jobs. On the other hand, Modi's second offering is this dangerous, divisive, strident Hindu nationalism. And what we've seen in this election is, that hasn't delivered the votes he was expecting. In the Hindi heartland and north of the country where that normally works, it hasn't worked. So what's he going to do? Is he going to step it up or is he going to pare it back? These are the two things he's going to struggle with.
And then quickly, before I let you go, what does this mean for U.S. relations with India?
I'll be honest with you, I think absolutely nothing. At the moment, India is in a geopolitical sweet spot. It's a counterweight to China. We've seen this last year with the accusations of assassinations on Canadian soil, with sort of India's palling up to Russia. I can't see what it would take for India not to be a natural ally to the West right now.
Avantika Chilkoti, thank you so much for being with us with The Economist. Thanks again.
Thank you.
A new report shows Russian attacks have damaged some 210,000 buildings in Ukraine since the start of the invasion in February 2022. According to analysis from the New York Times, the amount of devastation would be comparable to, quote, every building in Manhattan leveled 4 times over. The report found more than 900 schools, hospitals, churches, and other institutions have been damaged or destroyed. Those sites are explicitly protected under the Geneva Conventions, established to create humanitarian standards during times of conflict. The Times says these numbers are likely higher due to a lack of accurate data for some parts of Ukraine. A dual U.S.-Russian citizen was sentenced to 3.5 years in a Russian prison Wednesday for, quote, rehabilitating Nazism. Yuri Malev was arrested in December for sharing images on social media posts disparaging the St. George's ribbon, a symbol of Russian military pride. A Russian court said the post disrespected Russian society and insulted World War II veterans. The court said Malev admitted guilt. Malev joins a growing list of Americans held in Russia, including Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Marine veteran Paul Whelan. While testifying separately on Capitol Hill Tuesday, the Attorney General and the FBI director said they were both concerned about the possibility of a terrorist attack on U.S. soil.
I am worried about the possibility of a terrorist attack in the country after October 7th. The threat level for us has gone up enormously.
There was already a heightened risk of violence in the United States before October 7th. But now, on top of that, increasingly concerning is the potential for a coordinated attack here in the homeland, not unlike the ISIS-K attack we saw at the Russia Concert Hall back in March.
Director Wray says threats from foreign terrorists have skyrocketed since he testified last year before the Senate Appropriations Committee, subcommittee, I should say. He told lawmakers the FBI needs more funding to combat this increased danger. Meanwhile, Garland testified before the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees that there has also been a, quote, terrible explosion of anti-Semitic threats since Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. A sweeping election interference case based out of Georgia has been paused for several of its defendants, including former President Donald Trump. An appeals court issued a stay as Trump and 8 others seek to remove Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis from the case. The court is considering whether she should be disqualified over her relationship with the special prosecutor she hired. Willis had admitted to having been romantically involved with Nathan Wade, that prosecutor. The judge overseeing the case ruled in March Willis could remain, but only if Wade resigned, which he did. Arguments are scheduled for October 4th. Devastating flooding in Brazil has forced hundreds and thousands of people from their homes for good. Ahead, why scientists believe the mass displacement due to climate change is increasing. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine. But it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 Hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Scientists from around the world say, human-caused climate change will make extreme flooding recently seen in southern Brazil more likely. Brazilian officials say those floods last month killed at least 172 people and displaced more than 500,000 others. Natural disasters like that are fueling a new crisis, climate migration. Brazilians who spoke with the Washington Post said they would not return due to the increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather. Experts also say there will be more climate refugees in the future. For more, let's bring in Lauren Reese. She is the director of the Environmental Change and Security Program at the Wilson Center. Thank you so much for being with us. As a starting point, can you just define what a climate refugee is and how that's different from, say, other kinds of refugees?
Yes. Well, first of all, I mean, it's absolutely true that we're going to see increased movement of people due to climate change. But most of that movement continues to be within borders. It's internal within countries. People tend to stay within their country's borders. Now, where we do see people being pushed across borders as a result of climate change, it's important to note that international law does not recognize climate refugees. So they don't have the same protections as refugees. They're not allowed to or able to seek asylum. They don't have access to the same basic services and rights, and they don't have access to resettlement programs, for example. And so when it comes to the law, there is no such thing as a climate refugee. Now, whether that will remain the same moving forward remains to be seen.
Given the weight that refugees are placing on all kinds of different nations, is your expectation that it probably won't change because countries that are already dealing with refugee issues wouldn't want to pass any legislation that would say, oh, bring in more refugees, even if they thought the underlying reason was valid?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of complex sort of dynamics within the international law regime, but it also comes down to the fact that it's very hard to prove that people are moving for sort of the direct reasons related to climate change, right? Oftentimes, it's actually sort of the indirect impacts of climate change and how climate change is impacting people's access to jobs, people's access to livelihoods, the impacts that we're seeing on And farmers, for example, around the world who are reliant on the land and precipitation for their livelihoods, the reasons that they end up moving is more about economic than it is about sort of flooding or droughts, right? And so being able to show those direct impacts of climate change on a person's decision to move is very difficult.
What interested us in this story, among other things, was the Washington Post story that focused on Brazil mostly. But the headline of that story was that the climate refugee crisis is here. Help us understand where we are in the chronology. I mean, the idea being that whatever's happening in Brazil is so much different that it's hastened or sped up the climate refugee issue. Do you see it that way?
Well, look, I mean, this week, the Panamanian government is moving 300 families off of an island off the coast of Panama to the mainland. Here in the U.S., the village of Newtok in Alaska has been undergoing a full-scale relocation because its land is falling into the sea, right? This is a lengthy, fraught, expensive process that does not have a blueprint and is one that we are going to see continue to play out around the world. I think when you look back to 10 years ago, there were a lot of warning signals, and now those warning signals are blaring, right? And so we do need to think about how we change our sort of migration pathways for people so that they have a viable, sort of safe and an orderly way to escape climate's worst impacts.
And as a final question, there are many, we know sort of what needs to be done to fix the climate problem, but leaving that aside for the moment, what kinds of pathways, what kinds of measures can individual countries take to deal with these refugees?
Well, I think that when we look at Brazil, for example, it's not just about climate change, right? We also see this is a region that saw nearly 1,000 severe rainfall events in the last decade, and yet the financing that they put towards flooding prevention systems was actually decreased in recent years. So we also need to think about how we shore up the infrastructure and access to services and climate-proof these services and infrastructure, our economies, our agricultural and food systems, so that people have a choice to stay, right? So I think one of the things we think about is that idea of choice. And we don't want people to be forced to leave. We want to provide access to sort of safe, orderly migration where it's needed, but also provide resilient livelihoods and options for them to remain where they'd like to be.
Lauren Reese with the Wilson Center, thank you so much. It was very helpful.
Thank you.
Now to a digest of some foreign news. Israel reportedly organized an online campaign through hundreds of fake social media accounts that targeted U.S. lawmakers and the American public with pro-Israel messaging to gain their support for its conduct in the war in Gaza. The New York Times reports that the campaign started last year and was commissioned by Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, a government body which connects Jewish people from other countries with the State of Israel. The ministry allocated around $2 million and hired a political marketing firm in Tel Aviv for the operation. According to the Times, the fake accounts specially focused on black Democratic lawmakers, with posts urging them to continue funding Israel's war effort. Many of the posts were generated by ChatGPT, an artificial intelligence chatbot. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and opposition Labour Party leader Keir Starmer went head-to-head in a heated television debate ahead of next month's election. The two leaders clashed over issues including tax, the cost of living, and the country's healthcare system. During the debate, Sunak claimed that families will pay more taxes if the Labour Party wins, an accusation Starmer called, quote, absolute garbage. The general election is set for July 4th. And according to a Ukrainian official, the country has struck inside of Russia with American-provided weapons, a claim the U.S. has yet to confirm. It was the first time Ukraine has admitted using U.S. weapons to fire into Russia. The attack comes just days after the Biden administration granted permission for the limited purpose of defending Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, where Moscow is conducting an offensive. Health officials say a person in Mexico has died after contracting a strain of the bird flu, making it the first fatal case. The World Health Organization said the 59-year-old had been hospitalized in Mexico City and had no history of exposure to poultry or other animals. They also had underlying health conditions. The fatal strain is not the same one that has infected animals and 3 farm workers here in the United States. Health officials still say bird flu poses a low risk to the general population. The U.S. women's soccer team may have a teenage phenom on board. Ahead, more on the 16-year-old star who scored big in her international debut with the team. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
This really
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
What does that mean in
Did
English?
any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides. When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
This week marked 35 years since the Chinese government killed hundreds of pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square, Beijing. One man and one image immortalized that moment to the world. He's known as Tank Man. CBS News was there, and reporter Richard Roth told his story.
One man alone, of course, can't stop an army. Except for a moment, that's exactly what happened here. For 3 minutes in the middle of the day, an army was stopped by a man who stood still. A man who'd made up his mind, it seems, though why we just don't know. But when bystanders rushed in to save this stubborn soul, it wasn't easily done. He was pushed away at last, faceless in the crowd. Safe, we think, but in a city verging on calamity. What moves a man to just stand still? Is it courage or outrage or madness? We can't tell what was on his mind, and we can't forget what he did.
Security was tight around Tiananmen Square this week. Memorials were held in many parts of the world, including Hong Kong and Taiwan. A beagle breeder has been ordered to pay $35 million in fines. Prosecutors call it the largest fine under the Animal Welfare Act in history. In 2022, about 4,000 beagles were rescued from a Virginia facility that raised them for drug experiments. The company that owns the facility, Envigo RMS, pleaded guilty to conspiring to violate the Animal Welfare Act. Prosecutors say the violations included inhumane euthanasia practices, inadequate veterinary care, and not meeting standards for housing or feeding. The dogs were sent to the Humane Society, which helped them get adopted. A 23-year-old juror has been dismissed from a case after she received a bag of $120,000 in cash and an offer for more. The juror was in a charitable fraud case in Minnesota over the alleged theft of $40 million from a program meant to feed kids during the pandemic. She said a mystery woman left her the money and offered her more if she voted to acquit the 7 defendants on trial. They're the first of 50 people expected to stand trial for their alleged participation in a scheme to steal $250 million from taxpayers. Most 16-year-old soccer players score goals for their high school teams, but most players aren't Lily Johannes. The teenage phenom made U.S. women's soccer history in her international debut, scoring a goal against South Korea in the team's 3-0 victory Tuesday. The goal made Johannes the 3rd youngest player to score for the U.S. women's team. The national team will be back in action against Mexico next Thursday. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. President Biden is in France as the world commemorates 80 years since D-Day. We're traveling with the commander-in-chief as he meets with European allies. Plus, the heat is on in Arizona with triple-digit temperatures being felt in the state. How officials are working to keep vulnerable communities safe this summer. And finally, we have liftoff. Boeing Starliner spacecraft launched into space after a number of delays and setbacks. How we got here and what Boeing hopes to accomplish with the mission. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here? What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?
Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean?